When was your gut feeling actually right? Twice. While delivering pizza to shady neighborhoods. Things didn't look right. I trusted my instincts and booked. Both times. No one ever called back to ask about their food never arriving. That's all the proof I need. I'll never understand the idea of robbing a pizza person. You're robbing, possibly assaulting or killing a working man-woman for what is probably 20 or less. I've hung around with gang members and some pretty rough types, but none of them ever told me they did that. It's a very meth head thing to do. It was 1995. I was 18. Still living with my parents. And I was walking home from a friend's house at about 2 AM in the middle of the summer. He only lived 5 or 6 blocks away. And we often hung out watching movies after I got off work. Usually I would drive to his house because we'd been out with other friends. But this night I had parked at home and we walked to his place. There's not usually a lot of traffic between our houses. But this night I was about halfway home when a pickup truck drives by with 2 guys in the cab and 2 in the bed. I immediately felt like I was in danger. I saw the truck turn the corner and I dove over some hedges in the closest yard I could find. I hid under them. I saw the truck come back around the corner and slowly drive down the street. When it got to where I was hiding, I heard one of the guys say, "Where did he go?" and another respond that he didn't know. They kept driving and I didn't see them again. I stayed hidden for a good 15 minutes before getting up and running the rest of the way home. I'm certain they would have jumped me if they found me. This reminds me of when I was about 18. 2. Had this random friend I'd just met, kind of a weird dude. No real family, so once he met my group of friends he just kind of followed us everywhere. He was one of those people who just had a bull C4 bullets on him. I was living in the hood in LA. We are walking over an overpass and a car full of cholas slowly passes us. Eyes on us. As soon as the car passes, my friend was like, "Let's hide under this bridge." We book it, hide in the dark under the bridge, and just a few seconds later the car full of cholas slowly drives down where they assumed we were going to be walking. We can see them looking everywhere, cruising slowly, wondering where we were. As soon as they left the street we booked it back to my house, staying in the shadows until we were safe. When my dad passed out in a bathroom at the airport, I told him to purchase an Eid because they were selling them at the time at Sam's Club 2007 for $1K. I just knew it was an arrhythmia, and I was right. He died a month later, and if he had his Eid he might have survived. It was an arrhythmia. Growing up, I was always wary of my uncle on my dad's side of the family, not blood related. Even as a young child, I just knew that I didn't like being around him. He never gave me any reason to feel this way, and I never voiced it to anyone. As I grew older, my family moved away, and I saw less of him. But anytime my extended family met for holidays I would see him and avoid him. Couple years down the track, I was around 12 or 13, when my parents sat me and my older brother down and told us that my cousin, my uncle's daughter, had been raped and molested by him from a young age. This had all come to light when my aunt caught it happening later, found out she was abused by him too. Really wish my gut feeling hadn't been right about that one. When I was a young woman, my husband and I lived on a military base. At the time, the base was wide open and many local people used it as a shortcut from one town to another. The base also had free base newspapers available at many places on base. One week the newspaper said that facilities engineers base maintenance were going to begin installing attic fans in our townhouses. Sure enough, someone banged on my door later in the week and announced that he was there to install my attic fan. I was immediately suspicious. He was not military, dirty, scraggly beard, paint-stained clothes, but mostly it was my dog's reaction. Candy was a husky shepherd mix, so not a small dog. She'd put herself between me and him as best she could. Her hackles were up, and she was growling. That deep bass in the chest growl that you feel more than hear. I asked to see a work order and ID. He said I don't need no ducking work order, and yanked open the screen door. It was latched, but those kind of latches are meant to keep toddlers and dogs in, not grown men out. Candy roared and went for his throat. He jumped back and slammed the screen. I grabbed Candy, dragged her back, slammed and locked the door, ran to the back and slammed and locked that. Then I called the MPs. They came out, verified that my street was not due to get attic fans for a couple of weeks, and took all the information I could give them, which wasn't much. I never heard anything back, so they probably never identified him. 2 or 3 weeks later, the real installers came from facilities engineers, in uniform. They promptly produced work orders and ID. Candy looked at them, and went back to playing with the baby. I'm absolutely certain that she saved me from rape, possibly from murder. Used to work in the emergency room. Had a man come in with ripping chest pain that started not but 30 minutes prior, after he moved something heavy at his office. I knew he was going to die just by looking at him. Massive overwhelming dread just seemed to engulf me. I did his EKG and I hoped something would be wrong with it, so we could get him a bed. His EKG was perfect. Not 5 minutes later he went into cardiac arrest on our waiting room floor, after running the code for 45 minutes. He didn't make it. He had a massive aortic dissection. There wasn't much hope. This was almost 3 years ago, and I've seen more shit since then. But the memory is still burned in my mind. And it hurts knowing I was the last person to speak to him. This happened to my dad. He was just sitting on the couch, then it felt like my spine snapped and broke. He called around asking people if he was in enough pain to go to the hospital. He hates needles and will do anything not to go, but my family convinced him he had to go, and they called an ambulance. Turns out his aorta was leaking tore. Everything happened so fast with the surgery and boom, he survived. After everything settled, we kept on being told how lucky he was to survive the ambulance, then how even more lucky he was to survive the surgery. Every time I think of what must have went right for him to survive, I'm amazed by what doctors can do. Dated a guy for 3.5 years. He joined the army and a few months later a girl at his base made a Thanksgiving post about being thankful. Tagged him and a ton of other people in it. I pestered him about her a few times, but he was very adamant about her just being a friend. Until 5 months later, when he told me he knocked her up via a meme. Helped a victim of human trafficking get to a shelter. Context: I was a medical student at the time, now a resident, and the city my school was in is a hub for human trafficking. I noticed a patient in the emergency room who had a pretty bad injury to her face, was with a sketchy looking guy who was not related to her. She wasn't my patient, but I brought my gut feeling up to her doctor, who then made up some excuse to talk to the patient alone and got her to help. I never talked to her myself, but I couldn't shake the vibe I got from looking at her and the man she was with. Not me, but my wife. I had a work friend who used to come over to smoke blunts and play Sparks. I liked the guy, even though I knew he was a bit odd. He was really good at Call of Duty and rolled a means blunt. He used to tell some tall tales that everyone knew were bullshit. Well, my wife, who was only my girlfriend back then, always got a creep vibe from him. She said he looked at her with so much anger and malice, but never indicated any specific action that made her uncomfortable. After a while I stopped hanging out with the friend, since he wasn't coming to town as much for work. Fast forward a few years and another mutual friend calls me to say this Sparks friend was killed by police. Unfortunately only after he had already killed his neighbor and his wife. Crazy. Horrible. I stopped being mates with someone due to them being incredibly angry on a regular basis for no significant reason. He never did anything horrific, but I'm not sorry I lost that friend. It isn't worth the risk. I was a 20-year-old student, alone in my apartment one evening. I was expecting the cable guy, so when I heard a knock at the door I opened it. I saw an older man. That definitely was not the cable guy, as he did not have a uniform on. I asked him what he wanted. He said he was going around the apartments installing security alarms. I right away did not trust him and told him that was a bad time and that my roommate was on the phone long distance when long distance was expensive with her parents and was going through some personal stuff. She was not there, but I did not want him to think I was alone. He said, "Where is she?" I just closed the door in his face and said, "Not a good time." I called my landlord the next morning and asked her about installing security alarms, and she had no idea what I was talking about and did not authorize it. Woman, if you ever get into a situation where it looks like you are alone, really try to convince the person that is making you feel uneasy that you are not alone. Another time when I was young, walking home in the dark and two men stopped their car and started saying lewd things to me. I just walked up to a house and knocked on the door and they drove off quickly. Way more vulnerable when you are alone. I recently reported a coworker to management sort of based on some worrisome things I saw, combined with a gut feeling. Without going into a lot of detail, I saw some really subpar surgical prep. Now, I know people make mistakes sometimes, but there was something about this person's work that made me feel sick to my stomach. I couldn't sleep the next night thinking about it. I have a strong suspicion the coworker faked certifications and knowledge. Anyways, we will find out if my gut feeling is true. I didn't want to seem like a snitch, but when dealing with live patients, I feel a professional responsibility to say something before someone suffers permanent consequences. It started out as a gut feeling when I felt that something was off about my mom's boyfriend. Once I felt this way, I started to notice the red flags. The first one was the way my dog reacted to him. Even to this day, he's the only person my dog flat out didn't like. I think he might have even kicked him at one point when we weren't around. The next major red flag I noticed was that whenever his daughters came over 6 and 8, they rarely wanted to spend time with their own father and would hang out with my mom. It almost felt like they were trying to avoid him. I ended up bringing my concerns to my mom and she started to notice things too and so broke it off with him. A few months later she gets contacted by an investigator. Apparently, the boyfriend had been caught trying to sleep with his current girlfriend's daughter, so they wanted to get a statement from mom. I'm just glad he got caught, and it sounds like he'll be in jail for quite some time. My mom's the only woman in the house, so I don't think the dude was trying to come after my brother or I. Plus, we are both bigger than the man too. When I was a young kid back in the 80s, I was playing on my front lawn when this van pulled up on the road and the sliding door opened. A guy about 19-20 aggressively waved at me to come to the van and I immediately knew something wasn't right, so I ran inside and told my parents and they freaked out and ran outside, but they were gone by then. Stranger danger wasn't really a thing back then, and I had no idea what an abduction was at the time, but looking back on it, my life cold ended that day had I chose to go over to the van. I often wondered after that day if they ever did get a kid to get into their van. Driving in Pittsburgh, I stop at a red light. Hill goes up on my left, downhill on my right. Poor visibility to the left. The light turns green, but my brain tells me, hey bud, wait a second. I think this is a little weird, but I don't go yet. A millisecond later, a massive navy blue F350 comes barreling downhill through the intersection from my left, blowing past the red light at about 45, then trundles down the hill. If I'd have gone, I would have been destroyed by 3 tons of Ford truck, for sure. Instead I trusted the spider sense. When I thought it was really odd that someone who I considered more attractive than myself showed interest in me, didn't listen to my gut when it said something was wrong with the situation, and ended up being date raped. I honestly thought it was my low self-esteem trying to sabotage me, but apparently not. A few years back I was dating a girl who went camping with a friend for a couple weeks. I didn't mind cause I trusted her, but I started to get a gut feeling she was cheating on me while she was gone. Shortly before she was supposed to come back into town, she called and dumped me over the phone. Bonus points since I had literally just had brain surgery that she didn't bother to come back into town for. Edit should say dumped me for him. When I was a kid I had this teacher, I think grade 3, who was really creepy towards all of us girls. We would notice him looking at girls' butts or down their shirts. He was really weird and always found a reason to make girls stay after class for whatever. He gave me a really terrible feeling that I had never gotten from someone before. I never got too close to him and always made sure I wasn't in his room alone. I'm 25 now, and he just got arrested last year for having child pornography and was also caught with a hidden camera in his pen that he would take pictures down girls' shirts with. So creepy. Can't imagine the amount of videos pics this man has. He was an older man when he taught me in grade 3 and just got caught last year. I had one of those something is very wrong feelings in my stomach many years ago when driving to work one morning. I couldn't shake it the whole way there. though it wasn't a long drive. Made it to work and sure enough, the entire mood seemed just as off. Got to where I was to start my day and found out one of our supervisors had committed suicide earlier that morning. I stopped at Home Depot to pick up an item, so I knew it was going to be a quick trip. I'm in the store and notice I'm pretty much the only girl in there besides employees. I couldn't find what I was looking for and had to ask multiple employees before I found it. I check out, and as I'm heading out to my car I notice a shady dude standing against a tree on one side of my car. On the other side of my car is another shady guy sticking his arm outside of his car window. When I walked out they both turned and stared at me. My heart dropped. I started to feel queasy, and my mind instantly knew to turn around and go inside. I stood there shaking at the front of the store until I could get the courage to ask an employee to walk me to my car. As soon as they saw me walking out with an employee, the guy standing by the tree walked around my car and into the driver's side of the car parked next to me. To this day I swear I was a short walk away from being kidnapped.